What up, gamers? I'm Aaron, and today I'm joined by one of the greatest and only minds behind Demon Hunters.
Hey guys, I'm Shadarek. I write the guides for Havoc Demon Hunter. I make video content for Havoc and Devour. Just not Vengeance. That's about all.
Hell yeah. Alright, so, we're at that time of the expansion where every time you refresh your homepage, you will see 10,000 shitty tier lists. And while you might have thought you were safe from that on my channel, I then received 13 cents of YouTube ad revenue, and all of my morals immediately flew out the window. So today, we are going to be ranking all of the dungeons you will encounter in Season 1 of Midnight's Mythic Plus. But, with a twist. Because, in the grand scheme of YouTube, we are nobodies. You see, Shadarek is not even a fifth of a Dratnos, and I am not even a fifth of a Shadarek. So, at multiple times throughout our tier list, you will see these bonus dungeons appear, which means we will be rolling the Wheel of Dungeons to reveal any dungeon that has been in rotation at any point since Shadowlands. That dungeon will find itself on our tier list, so that when you find out in a later video that we actually liked Halls of Infusion, you don't feel incredibly betrayed. So, to start us off, I will roll the Wheel of Dungeons, and we'll see where we're going to begin our beautiful tier list. Alright, a fan favorite, Sanguine Depths. Shadarek, would you like to start us off here? Do you have any thoughts on the Sanguine Depths?
Okay, some thoughts on Sanguine Depths. Let's see. This dungeon was known for pretty much the worst bosses ever designed. At least 2 of them. We love cameras in very tight corridors. Those are always great.
Of course.
But the canisters were very fun when you stacked them up. And then Blizzard detected fun and took away all our toys that, fully activated them and gave us our damage buff. This was like... A lot of people hated this dungeon, a lot of people loved it. It was like very divisive. I definitely think it was on the lower end as someone that did hierarchies, though. The second boss in here was just kind of awful. I hated that boss so much, and it ruined the whole experience for me.
Yep. Yeah, I think that Sanguine Depths suffers a lot from the fact that it is a type of dungeon that I like to refer to as a linear mob tube. And pretty much any of these dungeons, like you mentioned with the camera angles, are going to suffer. And, a lot of the time I think that's because of routing, but I actually thought Sanguine Depths was pretty good with routing. Like you said, the canisters. But yeah, especially with, the gauntlet, this dungeon was definitely not as good as it could have been. So, Sanguine Depths will be our baseline for the tier list. We're going to be ordering around this. So, where should we put this Sanguine Depths? I'm going to say, I wouldn't put it S tier. I was maybe a bigger fan of this dungeon than some people.
I think C tier is kind of fitting for me. Probably bottom of C tier if we put anything else in there. That's kind of where I'm leaning.
I think that's very fair. Okay, so we'll put Sanguine Depths in C tier. And I do want to say, I don't want to let my bias show too much, but I actually think fondly on Sanguine Depths when I think back to it. But, so we'll move on, now that we've covered arguably one of Shadowlands' weaker dungeons, to what I think we both maybe feel is one of Midnight's weaker dungeons in Season 1, which is going to be Seat of the Triumvirate. Now, I don't know about you, but in my experience, I was really unsure oftentimes if mobs in Seat of the Triumvirate were just randomly 3 key levels harder than every other dungeon, or if it was because for every 1 Seat of the Triumvirate you do on the beta, you had to do 10 Pit of Sarons, so my healer was just never ready for it. But I was getting fucked in here all the time. I'm curious about your experience.
Definitely was one of those keys that people just didn't like running. I think by the time it had gotten a lot of tuning, the bosses started to feel quite a bit better. And it didn't feel like it was super out of line being more difficult after a lot of tuning. This is a dungeon that, for me though, I never did in Legion, because I didn't play in Legion, so I've only done this rework version. I know people that played in Legion pretty much say this was like one of the worst dungeons ever made. So I don't have that experience with it, but it's still pretty awful. So,
yeah, I've only heard bad things myself.
It's weird too, because this is a dungeon that looks like it's like kind of open concept and you could pull and do what you want. And the more I look at it, the more it isn't. It's really just you are getting guided in an open field, and you have to go one direct way the whole way through. And
Yeah.
there's like no variation of what you pull.
Because you've got to pull at least some of the big guys in the open courtyard, and you're not going to drag them around to each other. So
I think you need to do every single one of them.
every single
spawn
one?
the second
Okay, I wasn't
boss.
sure if that was a terrible routing mistake or if that was where we were being guided, but yeah. So every single one of the big guys, you're not pulling them to each other, and you definitely don't really want to do a big pull into them, so it does really feel very restrictive. So
Yeah.
I do have the same experience, though, where I thought the bosses felt pretty decent. I know the first day of beta, the third boss was like the Hitler of World of Warcraft bosses. It was an actual nightmare, but that was pretty bearable by the end. So I'm maybe leaning towards definitely lower than Sanguine Depths at the moment. I would say at least D, but would you feel confident giving Seed of the Triumvirate the Ass Dungeon Award?
The thing that saves it for me and puts it in D tier is that I don't hate all the bosses. I kind of like the second boss where you're fighting the 3 different mobs that share health. It's not some super cringe, make sure they all die at the same time, they just share health and die together. I prefer those kinds of bosses. I kind of like the burn window on Lura, the last boss. And the third boss really isn't too bad. The first boss, though, that one I despise how the slimes work on him.
Yeah, it feels almost like they recreated the Cinderbrew Meadery Mead boss, but maybe worse? Or I
can't
honestly
control where they spawn at all. They're just like all over the room. You can't cleave.
Yeah.
You need 2 Death Knights to properly stack them. And it's just...
I mean, even with...
So
Go ahead, sorry.
I was gonna say, I could go without that boss. Like, if they just removed that boss from the dungeon, that'd probably bump this up a whole tier rank for me.
Yeah, no, I agree.
That's why I'm landing on D tier.
And I was even, like, playing for 90% of the beta, it was a Frost Mage angle. So even with a slow on everything, it was still frustrating to manage. So I'm actually quite with you. I could have been convinced, if you wanted to throw out our Ass Dungeon Award, but Seed of the Triumvirate definitely saved by the skin of its teeth. Now, Windrunner Spire, however, I was initially not a fan of this dungeon, but every time that I have come to it in any way, I end up liking it a lot more. I'm starting to feel pretty positive about this place. I like that there's actually quite a lot of variety of enemy types and pulls within this dungeon. The poisons do feel a little bit extreme, and my asshole stays clenched for the entire time we're fighting the Apex Lynx. But other than that, I feel like by the end of the season, we'll be able to do some pretty monstrous pulls in this dungeon, and they seem quite enjoyable. So I'm curious what you think about Windrunner Spire.
I'd say it's the same where it grew on me. I think part of that has to do with changes they've made to the dungeon from the start of beta cycle to the end. Like, the last boss feels like an actual boss now. For a while there, we had a couple different iterations, but I like how they turned it out. But yeah, I agree that the pull sizes definitely feel like you can just keep doing them bigger and bigger. They felt a lot easier to control. They recently even nerfed the one thing that was like really difficult to deal with in there, which was the Flamehawk Fire Spits hurt so much. And I think at like a real key level where we're playing with an organized group, everything is very manageable, and this will have some pretty fun routing ideas, like what you do around people's cooldowns and things like that. The one thing that I don't really like about this dungeon, and this is probably going to sound like a weird one to bring up, but holy crap, it is as dreary as possible. Someone turn a light on in here. It is just the grayest of gray places.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's gray until you get inside for the third boss. Then we get greeted by our camera angle issues for an entire room. I do think, you know, really the most appealing area is probably the third boss area, because it's kind of like purple. But yeah, other than that, I totally agree with you. It's gray rooms, gray platforms, the fucking grass is gray. They really took the Ghostlands aesthetic to the max here. But I'm curious how you feel about some of the bosses. I think to me, maybe, the boss I enjoyed the least is actually Emberwing. But I'm going to take a guess that you like the Orc boss a lot less as melee than I did.
So, I think honestly, I kind of like every boss in here. I feel like they're all pretty easy to manage, even as a melee. Obviously, with the orc boss, it's like it can be a little awkward when your ranged players of Boomkin drooling on their keyboard, so they have the guy leap 40 yards away from me for some reason, and then they also don't come in for their fear, so I have to dash out to them to save their ass. But outside of Boomkin players, it's a pretty good boss. In the intermission, while he does his spin, it's kind of whatever, because you just kind of pull him off the mobs anyway, and he's immune. So it all feels very doable. Emberwing, I'm kind of surprised that you don't particularly like Sarange, just because that boss feels very easy. I almost feel like that boss is missing a mechanic for like a Mythic Plus boss, because of how simple it is. As long as your group is taking the fires out to the side and the tornadoes aren't in the middle of your room, at least.
Yeah, I think one thing to kind of piggyback off of that, something that I feel is maybe a recurring theme throughout this season, and it felt this way with Emberwing for me in the beta, is that a lot of the bosses that have any sort of required healing seem to be very light on mechanics. And it's been a while since I've done a Windrunner Spire where things hurt, but it seems to me that maybe the outgoing damage kind of took the place of a mechanic, because I'm sure we'll talk about that later with, like, Pit of Saron and Skyreach. But this season has some bosses where basically the only mechanic is you need a healer with a brain. And so I kind of agree that Emberwing does kind of fall in there. I didn't really like it because I swear he just happens to aim exactly where I blink, but that's probably just a personal beef that I've got with this dude. So yeah, I kind of agree with you. I think it's cool too that we will always have, whether we're melee or ranged, we'll always be able to hate Boomkin players. So I would maybe go as high as to say Windrunner Spire could maybe even jump a tier to A. I don't know if you would be as generous.
I think I'm comfortable putting it in A.
Okay.
I don't, because, like, one of the things that would restrict me from feeling like a dungeon is fun is having a pull that is not fun, or having specific mobs that are incredibly unfun to deal with. Think, like, let's say Priory, where you have archers that stop you from pulling other mobs in because they're just standing wherever they want, or you need multiple Death Knights to deal with it. And there's none of that really going on. Everything seems like lineable when you do have some shooters, and you can set everything up really well. And all the bosses, they don't feel bad. Like, I think all of them feel very well designed, as long as people in your group are playing around them even a little bit, at least. And I think for me, yeah, it kind of puts it in A. It's just the aesthetic of the dungeon that I don't love, but I do like the pulls and the bosses.
Yeah, I'm with you as well, and I'm glad to hear that, because I myself feel relatively high on all of the dungeons that are native to me. Not all of them, I apologize, but I think that there was a lot of fear going into this expansion about how some of the content might turn out with the, shifts in how we're going to play things with our reduced add-ons. And I think Windrunner Spire kind of has a good mix of everything. You mentioned, like, the fire spits from the Dragonhawks. I mean, that even kind of feels like a old school mechanic in the sense that, you're wanting to stop these when they start, rather than, the fears that this expansion might kind of return to either spamming your crowd control on everything like we had in Dragonflight and the War Within, or a space where only interrupts mattered. So, yeah, I'm a big fan of Windrunner Spire. Alright, so, now, we've made it to our second Wheel of Dungeons spin. I will hit this, and we land on beautiful Mists of Tir-na-Scythe. And for this one, I think maybe we'll want to focus on the most recent iteration of the dungeon. Obviously, it was imperfect in Shadowlands, and it was definitely imperfect in Season 1 of The War Within, but I think maybe we'll try to limit it to the most recent appearance. So,
I think that's a good way to do it.
You pushed a lot more than I did in Season 1 of The War Within, so again, I'm going to let you take the lead here on this dungeon.
So, Miss is an interesting one, and it's funny because this was a dungeon that has been easy every time it's come around. It's just been pretty easy, which meant it was a fan favorite for weekly keys, because people like doing whatever, is easiest and then just say it was a good dungeon. Miss is actually, honestly, a pretty poorly designed dungeon all around, and something that I think at the high end, most people really did not like this place. And I think even at a weekly level, it kind of came around where people were getting over dealing with the maze in the last iteration too. So with with Mist, though, like, you had some fun pulls. The last area was fun, and the start of the dungeon, how the pulls were structured, were also fun. But then you would get to the maze, and it's either your healer does it or your group has to deal with it, but either way, it feels really, really damn awkward. And I'm sure as a healer player, every healer hated this dungeon because that maze was just very cringe of a mechanic to do. You couldn't really group pulls unless you bugged things through walls using like a hunter pet or some weird air tricks to cast over massive walls, because you just fight one room at a time. And I just didn't feel like that was ever really fun. On top of that, we had some of the worst bosses, kind of period. Not so much like super difficult. I think the returning last boss was a lot better than previous versions, but the first boss scaled horribly by key level, and at the super high end, it just meant you had to play super heavy specific burst specs. And that dungeon was undoable on the same level without an augmentation enhanced shaman. And that pushed you up multiple key levels, and they were the only things that could do it, which I think by design is awful.
Yeah, I mean, even just having like sorry to cut off, but even like just having a power infusion or not in your group. I mean, obviously everyone was playing Disc at this point, but like even just the difference between you have an enhance versus you have a power infused enhance was probably like half a key level by itself. But sorry.
Yeah. Oh, no worries. But yeah, no, it was absolutely insane. And then, we come to the second boss. I didn't hate I think it was Miss Color, but she's just like kind of a single target dummy. Fox spawns every so often that you CC, and then you have those intermissions where you just hit an ad. And, it all felt very plain. There wasn't really anything going on. And then when you get to the last boss, I feel like that was a boss that was pretty good if you were a ranged player, and if you're a melee, every melee just hated it because it was so awful. But
yeah,
so it's a bit of a weird dungeon for me. It's one that like I feel like people would expect us to rank high, but as someone looking back on it that played it so much, the maze and the boss design really ruined the experience, despite the fact that there was fun pulls right at the start and right at the end.
Yeah, I think too, you always have to deal with the, if you're in a pug, you have the fifth affix, of course, is, people just run through random doors and it pisses you off. If you play in a slightly more coordinated group, that fifth affix becomes, your healer is screaming the wrong icon on the Mistcaller boss, and you realize halfway through killing it that you're on the wrong one. But I think something that I notice in Mists of Tyrannosaith, and I'm curious if you agree, is that a pretty big feature of modern dungeons that come back is that they make them usually worse, or at least more frustrating. And part of this, I think, is just the fact that everything sucked in the War Within Season 1, but when I look at the dungeons that came back in Season 1, like Mists of Tyrannosaith and Necrotic Wake, one of the biggest things that I notice is, one, they made a huge effort to cut options out of the dungeons. Like in Mists of Tyrannosaith, there was all kinds of pulling frogs over walls that would make it so that even if you got fucked by the maze, you could still kind of salvage your route. And when I look at Necrotic Wake, this was something as simple as that big-ass mini-boss that nobody pulls. Instead of making it so you maybe want to pull this mini-boss, they just fucking put him in a place that you can't skip him, and make it so that the boss doesn't even spawn until you kill him. There was just no way around it. And you saw this too in Mists of Tyrannosaith with adding giant AoE pulls to the Gorms. That was like the one thing you looked forward to. You're like, yeah, I have to do this shitty maze, but then I can pull 50 Gorms. And while you still were able to do that, they tried their best to make it so you couldn't. So I'm with you. I think I would go probably C. Maybe I could see an argument.
Legally, I have to put it ahead of Sanguine Depths, though.
There's
no world where I can justify... just as someone that played in Shadowlands, there's no world I can justify Mists behind Sanguine Depths.
I want to argue with you. I want to, because I am a Sanguine Depths lover. But that would maybe come down to determining whether Mists of Tyrannosaith legally also counts as a linear mob tube with the maze. But I'll give you this one. We'll put Mists of Tyrannosaith ahead of Sanguine Depths. So, that brings us to our next Midnight Dungeon, which is going to be Nexus-Point Xenas. And I'm going to just come out and say that in the opposite of Windrunner Spire, I like Nexus-Point Xenas less every time I do it. or every time I think about it, I find things I like less about it, because I didn't really mind the end of the dungeon trash, but I'm realizing I hate the trash here too. The trash before Lothraxion, I mean. You've got fixates, you've got frontals. It's like we're back in Shadowlands, speaking about Sanguine Depths and Mists of Tyrannus Height, and mob frontals, the way that they've brought these back for Nexus-Point. So, I would go pretty low here, but I'm going to let you take over, because you might have had a different experience.
So, from my experience, I'm going to speak about the whole dungeon, not just the end bit there. Let's start with the left side. The side where you're with the ethereals and there's the traps on the ground. I'm going to give a given that in most cases you're going to bring an engineer or a rogue, and you can actually disable those traps and get rid of them. And it gives you some playable space if you're setting up a pull in an area. That area is not too bad, but there's a lot of casters. But I definitely don't mind it. Going up to the boss is very simple. Oddly so. I'm not sure how the damage scales on higher keys, but this could go back to something you mentioned earlier, that if a boss is harder to heal, it's going to have less mechanics. And that's kind of always been the case, but I don't remember that one having anything that is truly too difficult to heal. And all it really is you get the one mechanic of the fight, you walk into 2 beams, or 3 if they're intersecting, you're good to go. Other than that, he's going to throw a circle on the ground somewhere, and just don't stand in that every 45 seconds. So it's like super simple on that side.
I will say, I do cut in real quick. I do think I am kind of an enjoyer of the Forge-Right boss. I think it's pretty rare that we see in Mythic Plus area denial bosses where the area denial doesn't just despawn before it ends up mattering. So to some extent, it's kind of cool to see, but it's also a lot easier to fuck up, I think, than other area denial bosses, because, if you have someone, for example, die with the buff, then that can get pretty scary pretty fast. But you were going to go into the right side, and I'll let you continue.
Yes. So the right side's more the void side, I believe.
Yes.
And once you get over there, there's like a couple interesting mechanics I haven't really seen before. The one that leaps to mind is it's like leeching entropy, I think it's called. And the mobs at low health leap inside of another mob and just start healing until you break the shield on them. Or you can stun them, so you can just actually stun them out. So you have multiple ways to deal with it. Just do damage or stun. Having heal cut for that can be useful. And other than that, you just have a little bit of ad control. Make sure they don't go summon the weird dudes that are just off to the side that need a little blob to go into them. But the trash over there doesn't feel particularly hard. It seems like you can actually do some pretty big beefy pulls that could be pretty fun, depending how you route. And then the boss itself is a bit weird designed, but it is pretty fun for me when I get these bosses that have these massive damage amps where you're supposed to figure out how to optimize your cooldowns to fit in a certain duration of a window. And it's not something that you're, necessarily playing the same as you would on like a boss, a regular boss, or your single target rotation, but there's optimizations you make based on how long that burst window is. And that fight, it has a 400% damage burn, so you really play entirely around that, and it's pretty frequent as well, so that's a boss I actually really do enjoy.
Yeah, I think that fight actually ends up being a lot more fun for the DPS players. I think there was maybe... I'm not sure if they intended there to be any thinking about it with that being also the main source of damage on the fight. I can't imagine a world where you ever want to do anything other than just mash every single person into the damage buff. So, if your healer ever loses someone or complains about it, then obviously you just point at them and laugh. Because, again, I don't think there will ever be a world where the strat will not be all 5 people in the shit all the time. But I do agree with you that I think the bosses are really the highlight of this dungeon. I like Forge-Right. I think that this boss is fun, and I think Lothraxion is pretty solid too. But like you mentioned about bosses feeling like they're missing mechanics, this dungeon almost feels like it's missing a part of the dungeon. I mean, sometimes I really feel like the right side of the dungeon almost barely feels like a wing of the dungeon. I mean, half the mobs here have incredibly low health pools. I know that that's not something that maybe you have to worry about as often as Havoc traditionally, because, you're fucking everything no matter what. But especially, playing Frost and Arcane, you really have to be thinking about, what mobs actually matter, and then you're kind of surrounded by all kinds of infinite shit, which I imagine would really suck for someone who's target capped. But, overall, I don't feel like any side of this dungeon really has a highlight point, and that's why I think I'm pretty low on Nexus-Point Xenas as a whole. The biggest highlight for me has been pulling the entire first room with Lust. That is an amazing feeling, and then the dungeon lulls to I'm not a fan. Where would you maybe go here on the tier list? If I had to ask you to make the call, what are you thinking?
I am thinking higher than you are, so we're gonna have to have a little debate on this one. For me, I'm thinking Nexus Point's at least around a B tier.
Okay.
You did mention that it feels like the dungeon's missing part of the dungeon, but I don't think that's a negative outright, because I don't have to sit there and AFK for 5 minutes of RP to make sure we hit a 30-minute timer or anything.
Oh, yeah.
I get to go in and actually have a very short dungeon that I'm just doing stuff most of the time, except for a little 30-second flight back after the bosses. So I like that they're toying with something here that is a very short-feeling dungeon, and for me, it's around a B tier, but I do hear some of your points.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely agree with you. I think the speed at which this dungeon can be completed is quite appreciated. And I do think it's funny how for the last couple builds of beta, they were, toying with the timer, take 30 seconds off, put 30 seconds on. It doesn't really make a difference if we're doing 29-30 or 30-30. So I do agree with you. And when I say it's missing something, it's not necessarily that I wish it was longer, so much as I wish there was maybe more highlights. But I could definitely see, while I don't like the optics of putting it in B tier, going off of our other dungeons, I think I probably would put it above Mists of Tyrannosaith. So we'll come in here on a B. I'm with you. But that brings us to the oldest Mythic Plus dungeon of all time, which is something that I think should immediately raise every sort of red flag that it possibly can, because the last time we heard oldest Mythic Plus dungeon of all time, it meant that we were going into either Grim Batol or Throne of the Tides, which were both war crime level atrocities that were committed on their respective seasons. Now, Pit of Saron is not Throne of the Tides or Grim Batol. How are you feeling on this dungeon?
This is going to be a hot take.
Okay.
And just to add to the hot take, just to make sure I'm making this as spicy as I can.
Yes.
I think Grim Batol and Throne of Tides were actually both good dungeons when they came back. But passing that and ignoring that was ever said, Pit of Saron. This is a dungeon that I thought looked horrible. Absolutely looked awful. And it surprised me every single time how much I liked it. You get really big-sized pulls. There's not a lot of stuff that you feel like it's super frustrating. It's honestly pretty easy to group mobs, and you can do a lot with your route. To an extent, you're guided to each of the scout camps, and you kind of need to do a general path around the dungeon, but there is some things that you can change up in the quarries with how you're pulling mobs to get your count. The first boss and the third boss, the final one, I enjoy both of them quite a bit. Especially with the changes to Forge Master. Pretty simple, but, I don't mind a target dummy that does a lot of damage to me. The last boss is not horrible when you play with people that know how mechanics work. It will just kill you if you're not using the ice blocks effectively. The only thing in this dungeon that I think truly puts it, a lower level than S tier for me, which might be surprising, is Ick and Crick. I despise that boss with all my heart, and they cannot fix that one.
I think I can imagine too that it maybe feels a lot less, if you have a shorter range interrupt, it maybe feels like you have a lot less control over the outcome of the boss as well. I would never want my Demon Hunter to have to, vengeful retreat to kick a death bolt or something like that. I will say, I am a little harder on the Forge boss. I think that this is definitely, probably the most boring healer check boss that we've had recently, until we maybe talk about one of the other dungeons in this pool. But, when I compare it to something like the third boss of Halls of Infusion, which, while that dungeon was fucking awful, The third boss was pretty good. Something like Yolnu, while absolutely terrifying the entire fucking time, was maybe a little more exciting than Move Behind the Rock. And now that the boss doesn't run to the forge, they made that change about halfway through the beta, you don't even really have to move behind the rock. You kind of just hit the boss wherever your tank puts it, and if that gets you killed, then you just flame your tank, which is my response to everything, obviously. One thing I do want to say, though, is I think Pit of Saron in low keys might get the reputation of being an easy key. You know, if you're doing your weekly 10, you'll probably like Pit of Saron. But I do think that Pit of Saron will probably be one of the highest coordination check keys in the rotation if nothing changes. Just because the amount of kicks going off is a lot higher, and the kicks that are spammed don't really matter too much. Obviously, the big change in Midnight is that you're not going to have to worry about those. However, some of the mobs like the Lich will just spam blasts on your tank that will completely obliterate them if you do not manage every single one. I mean, I watched MDI champion Kira get crumpled like a piece of tissue paper by one of these going off. So I think that as, you know, more casual players begin venturing up into the higher level keys, those may be a pretty consistent point of frustration. But other than that, I do agree with you. I think Pit of Saron, I was very pleased by. It does kind of frustrate me when I see people talking about how Pit of Saron looks like it's going to be terrible, because I thought it turned out quite well. And I have pretty minimal complaints. I think I'm a little higher on Ick and Crick than you are, but, you know, I have mage privilege. Doesn't matter to me what happens. You know, if there's a death bolt targeting me, I'll just invis it. But would you go as far as to say it's better or worse than our Nexus-Point Xenas and Windrunner Spires on the tier list?
I think I like Pit of Saron about the same amount as Windrunner Spire, maybe even a little more. The only note I have about that, though, is Windrunner Spire is... I feel like a lot of the pulls are kind of set up and grouped for you, in a way that, like, even more mediocre tanks will probably pull it pretty similar, and you'll have some pretty fun pulls. Where Pit of Saron takes knowing what you're doing in there, and you need an actual good tank for the pulls to be fun and feel like they make sense. So I think I'm a bit biased because almost all my experience with Pit of Saron was on beta, which meant playing with people that have done the key and are experienced in it.
Yes.
Maybe I'd have a different opinion if we were doing this for M0 week and I was pugging with it, compared to like Windrunner Spire. But for me right now, I think I'd put it in A above Windrunner Spire.
Yeah, I think I would generally agree with that. I think Windrunner Spire, to that point, is pretty plug and play. Like, I imagine, I referenced when we were talking about Windrunner Spire that I think you will be able to do some pretty colossal pulls in there towards the end of the season. And I believe that is because, like you said, it kind of pulls itself in the sense that, you know, once you get past the Lynx room, you open up into this big-ass plant-filled room, and you look at it and you're thinking, nothing here really keeps me from pulling it with the other things in this room. So it does maybe feel like some of those are intentionally built that way, in the way that Pit of Saron isn't. So I'm with you here. I also did want to push back on that. I'll meet you halfway with Grim Batol being okay, but I will not stand for Throne of the Tides being spoken about positively in any way. We'll go to Bonus Dungeon 3, and that means we're bringing back the wheel. Now, I will spin this bad boy, and I'm hoping for something not from Shadowlands. Alright, Dawn of the Infinites, Murazon's Rise. And to be clear, that is the second half. That is the second half. This is the one with Deos, and it starts with Tyr, which I think is maybe... I'll let you start.
Okay. This one is a bit of a throwback. Been a while since I've thought about this one.
I can take over.
First thing, I'm gonna start with the actual final boss and say that Deos is one of the weirdest and most difficult bosses I've ever done in Mythic Plus, and I never really knew why it was so hard, even when I was doing it. it just felt so difficult. There was damage coming out of nowhere. Sometimes the ads were easy to deal with, sometimes they were just impossible. And also, it liked crumpling your tank as well. So there were some fun moments in this dungeon, but like that boss has scarred me, and I need a little bit to collect my thoughts beyond him, because he is just living in my head rent-free right now.
Yeah, so I'll take over here. So I think that one of the biggest things that was going on with Rise specifically was that every single boss had like 800 fail points. Because in this same dungeon, you had Morchi as well. Which, Morchi maybe isn't the boss that you think this is the hardest boss ever, but there are still a million ways that that could go wrong. And that was the same with Deos. You know, any sort of minor slip-up on Deos with who was soaking, who was staying in their orb, or who wasn't, everybody's fucking dead. There is no shot that you recover from that whatsoever. There was kind of a semi-DPS check on the ads. You had the Battlefield boss. My memories of the Battlefield are somewhat faded as well. I do remember that the Demolisher was a nightmare, and you would pretty much always lust that if you could. And I always think, when I think about this dungeon, the thing that stands out the most to me is the room surrounding Tier. Because the timer in this dungeon was tight as fuck. That is one thing that I absolutely do remember. You had to be going fast. And every single pull in the entire first area of the dungeon had quite a lot of casts. There were bleeds going off. There was that ad that would fucking suck somebody into the mist and silence them. Any one person using their interrupt poorly could not really be salvaged. Because yeah, you could stop the little guys, but if you didn't have a kick for the grip, someone is dying. There's nothing you could do about it. And with the timer as tight as it was, you didn't really have time to wait between pulls, because there was also, I remember in every single pull, there was one fat-ass mob. So you're basically pulling big, and then you've got the maiden or whoever it was, and you're gonna drag this through the next 3 pulls. You don't get to slow down, because if you take it one at a time, you're gonna be out of timer before you even kill Morchi.
Yeah, and like...
Go ahead.
The more I think about it too, the more rough this dungeon was. Almost none of it feels redeemable looking back at it, because yeah, that first platform had some incredibly difficult traps that you had to do with mini bosses at a high level, and sometimes I remember us doubling mini bosses. We had to do multiple at the same time, and that was more than hard. That was something where we're gonna try to do a 10% chance play to get past this first platform, or even get to Tier, and then we'll see how the dungeon goes from there.
Yeah. And that was pre-resilient keys as well, when a 10% was not a fun thing to hear.
And none of these bosses were fun either. They weren't fun hard, they were hard. Morchi a bit less so, but it's like, when you're dealing with your problems with really cringe coordinated CC, and then breaking them out at the right time to blow up ads and stuff like that, it's not particularly fun. So yeah, this is not a dungeon that I look on fondly. I liked the first half of Dawn of the Infinites too, is the tough part, and I was thinking about that, a lot of it, but
yeah,
this side of it really was awful, and this was also the side that had the bad version of the sand, where when you got to the little portal room, you had to clear the mobs in the sand to cut sand paths, and that was also one of the worst things ever.
Just remembering that drops this a tier at least. Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead.
I would comfortably put this in S tier. I actually like this dungeon.
I am absolutely with you. I've even got more to say about it, but I'm just gonna say, this is winning the Ass Dungeon Award. But on top of all of that, I think it's also important to remember that, Dragonflight was a really fucking technical time for Mythic Plus, because, in the War Within, a lot of the mechanics that in Dragonflight would have been, dodgeable, became, this is just something that hits you and your healer healed it. But while dealing with all of this cancer, I can't remember exactly what all there was in here, every Dragonflight dungeon had you feeling like you were playing a Twitch shooter, trying to make sure that you avoided whatever mechanic. I remember how Halls of Valor in the Dragonflight era, you had 18 different packs with different mechanics, your tank could never stop backpedaling, all kinds of shit. And when I think about Dawn of the Infinites, the only example I can remember is the first half, but I remember if those fuckers teleported on you and started spinning, you had like a human reaction time length of time to get out of it, or you were getting double ticked and killed instantly. I think that actually was in the second half as well, towards the end, unless I'm misremembering. But
I think those were. I'm pretty sure those spinny guys were right at the very start of the first half. Like there's ones right before Chronicar that you dealt with a lot of, and then I think there was a bunch at the end going to Iridicron in the end of the first half.
Yes,
but
okay.
I don't think we had those in the second half.
Oh my god, and also this dungeon had roleplay cancer. That too, yeah. Like every single time you went to a new boss, 30 seconds, you had to skip the fucking little flying guys that flew around the battlefield. If somebody pulled those, you just had them jump off and kill themselves. Yeah, okay. Ass dungeon. But...
Alright, counter-argument though.
Oh, hit me with it.
It did drop the transmog item.
Oh, so, the tier hammer? Okay.
S+?
If you're a Ret Paladin, we can go higher. If you're a Ret Paladin, it's S+. If you're anyone else, anyone with a brain, ass. Okay. Now that we've gone to the depths of ass tier, Maisara Caverns. I've been telling everybody, Maisara Caverns is a certified banger, and everybody I've played with through Mythic 0 week is convinced I am gaslighting them. So I'm really gonna need you to back me up here and say that Maisara Caverns is a banger.
I think Maisara Caverns is one of the dungeons that feels bad on super low levels because it's harder to group mobs, but then you'll get them grouped, and you can do some pretty big pulls here. But in M0s, by the time you're getting them grouped and your DPS have already popped their cooldowns, most of the mobs are dying anyway. So it definitely feels a bit bad there, but I do actually like this dungeon's design. I like the bosses, and actually, I'm a little hit or miss on the first boss. He's a little bit cringe. He keeps leaping out where I can't cleave him. But besides that, I mostly like the bosses. None of the trash is super difficult. There's, a few important kicks to actually get, and then things that just aren't so important to stop. I am not entirely sure what the first area is supposed to look like for getting the 8 people, out of containment, or, you have to get the 8 people to go to the first boss. I'm not sure what routes are supposed to look like, because I've seen some very wildly variant things, and if I have one more person pull a mammoth inside of a hut where I can't see a thing, I will crash out.
Yeah, that's
insane. Other than that, I'm thinking it's A tier.
Hey, I was really hoping you would reach for S, but I want to say I agree with you. I think that there's quite a lot of options here. I'm thinking it's probably going to end up right side where you get the health buff. I would be a little sad to see that the poison buff on the left side, if that ends up scaling with key level, like some of the Mechagon Junkyard stuff.
It will.
If it becomes absurd, I will be very disappointed, and I'm sure this is something that I could have checked on logs already before we started talking. But if that's not a problem, then I think it's really nice. I think it's really cool, too, that Maisara Caverns, if I had to compare it to a dungeon, and this might sound terrifying at first, but if I had to compare Maisara Caverns to another dungeon, it would be the No-Coup Defensive, which sounds scary because No-Coup Defensive would just beat your ass at 90 different points. But the way that I think it's the same is that Maisara Caverns and No-Coup both have so much variety in the types of enemies that you encounter throughout the dungeon. You go through different environments where you've got different things to worry about. You've got the back half of the dungeon with, there's these fuckers that walk through me as a ghost and root me. You've got the beginning half, which is obviously very open and kind of built around trying not to die to passive spear throw damage while your tank pulls mammoths and mobs that shoot lava at you. Overall, I love the variety in Maisara Caverns, and I love that there are trash packs that could have 4 or 5 different dangerous things going on at the same time, while not feeling like No-Coup Defensive, where you are just constantly afraid for your life. You've got the eagles flying around trying to claw you, and you've got the masks shooting lava at you, but it never feels like at all times you will die if you are one step out of line. And I like the bosses as well. I mean, the first boss, I'll agree with you. It's definitely the weakest of the 3. I do like the other 2, though. How's your experience with the other 2 bosses been, actually?
So, on beta, I think the experience was good, and, again, doing actual, keys. seen some interesting stuff in M0s, and I don't want to speak on that, but it's something where I think once people are understanding how the boss works, I just like it. It's simple enough, just have 2 spirits touch, stun out the other ones or kite them out a little bit, let the timer run out or whatever works for your healer, then have them touch. The intermission is supposed to be kind of bullet helly, but on, not really doing keys right now, you just kind of break the shield so fast that
it's
not really anything going on.
But
it's like very doable in a key setting, and it's not a bad kind of bullet hell to me. Like, it's something that's like very predictable and easy to do. We've had some like dodge mechanics that feel very bad. I'm kind of thinking like End of a Tall Dazar with the spiders.
Oh yes.
Stuff like that I absolutely hate, but I kind of like it on this boss. And then that's kind of all she really does, so she's simple enough. Yeah. The last boss, I like that there's different ways that you could deal with how you want to do the totems as a team. I like that if you play well, you can actually pretty easily stack them up almost in the exact same spot, and then just kind of like cleave and burn them down. And nothing about that boss feels super difficult. I like that you can like min-max being good at running back, not getting yourself rooted from the images, how your team breaks all the spirits for the speed buff and damage amp, and get back to get as much of a burn as you possibly can, because the speed there actually matters. He's CC'd for a set amount of time, so I like that as well. It just feels like very skill expressive to me, and that makes me enjoy it.
I agree. If I had to take my glazing goggles off for Maisara Caverns, I would say the part that I do think, speaking of bullet hell, is the most frustrating is probably the final bridge. Because pretty much everybody has resorted to just don't fuck with it and hug the corners of the wall. Because it is admittedly kind of a frustrating thing to have to deal with the balls that bounce down the bridge. If you get hit by one, you are getting knocked back into getting hit by it a second time. And it's green on green. It's not easy to see. So I definitely think that Maisara Caverns is not perfect. For me, this is definitely my favorite out of the Midnight Dungeons. So if you asked me, I would say, at worst, it is top of A. I would swing for an S, and say that relatively, compared to the field, it is S. But I'll let you make the decision there.
No, I'm going to make you make the decision on this one. You put that bad boy in S.
Maisara Caverns going S tier. Hopefully, we get something that is similarly S tier next, when we pull up the greatest Warlords of Draenor dungeon of all time. The one that I'm sure everyone cannot wait to get back into. Skyreach. Now, we started off linear mob tubes strong, with Sanguine Depths. But now, as we return to linear mob tubes for its 2016 iteration of Skyreach, it fucking sucks. In my opinion. Skyreach starts off okay. Alright, I think the packs at the start of Skyreach are pretty good. I think this dungeon hits its absolute peak on the platform containing the first boss. Then you fight the first boss, you've got 2 fun pulls after the first boss at most, if you don't double pull them, and then it becomes a terrible dungeon. You've got the second boss, which I think the second boss of Skyreach would work out perfectly with our friends who are currently playing the Burning Crusade Classic. You could just send that boss to them, and they wouldn't even notice the difference. Then you've got the bird, which, manageable. Your pug teammates are going to revive phoenixes, though, so get ready for that. And this fucking bird wind puzzle. Okay, can your class skip the bird puzzle as a demon hunter?
Oh yeah.
Okay, mine can too. As a mage, I can blink past probably 90% of the difficulty of the bird puzzle. So maybe it's just me, but somehow, it still manages to piss me off. I swear, these birds have fucking aimbot. Because I will say, I am 100% out of this fucking bird, and it hits me. And it doesn't just hit you, it does damage now too. You will see people die to the bird puzzle in Skyreach. You will see me die to the bird puzzle. I actually do think the last boss is pretty solid, but I'll just leave it at that. I want to hear your thoughts about Warlords of Draenor's shining gem here.
I actually have very different opinions on this dungeon than you.
Oh, okay. Perfect.
I almost entirely like the dungeon. I will give it to you that the bird wind puzzle absolutely sucks and has no reason to be there. But as someone that can skip it, that is definitely skewing my opinion because I literally don't do that mechanic. Anyway, the low point of the dungeon for me is the third boss, the bird boss with the phoenixes. It did get better after its like most recent changes, and I don't think it's so bad anymore. But it is definitely the weakest boss. You just don't even have a ton of boss uptime. You need to hit the birds a lot, and I think it's going to scale really bad off key level, unfortunately. Yeah. So I'm not a big fan of that one. But I like almost every single pull in this dungeon and all the bosses. You noted that the second boss was, way too easy. They did make changes to it. It's not quite the same as it was. Because for a while there, it was literally just soak beams. Your tank does the frontal, that's it. Then they added the frontals to the guys.
Right, you got the little mini frontals now as well.
Yeah, and then that one was just, okay, stand under the boss, and none of them hit the center. And then they put a puddle under the boss, so you actually can't go through the middle anymore, and you can't stand there, so you actually do need to dodge now. And then they actually added a tank frontal visual, so you're not dealing with whatever that was, where it was just like, good luck, make sure you saw where the tank was when it started. So I think that fight's gotten a bit more to it now, where you actually need to do movement, figure out who's soaking what beams in a relatively decently fast fashion, and if you don't, the boss gets a bit of healing and a bit of damage, and that becomes either a one-shot problem or your healer's problem. I don't mind that design. The first boss after his rework is actually quite good. He was very awful before.
Yes.
All the trash, I feel like, is very doable, and there's a lot of cases where you can double up or triple up pulls. Even, you mentioned you get like 2 fun pulls before you go down to the room for the second boss. You could actually double those constructs. Those things can be a lot of fun and pulled super aggressively, but you need very good utility usage, defensives and external usage, maybe classes with like Shadow Melds, Feign Dust, whatever, because you can cancel those beams out too if someone gets doubled. And it's a lot like the Purify mobs from the Priory, except for they don't blow up and heal everything for some goddamn reason. So in general,
I like not a high tier, but we'll...
yeah. So like for the most part, I like almost everything about the dungeon. We have orbs that you swap to because they do group damage and healing. And I don't feel like any of the pulls feel super impossible. It's just the third boss is the one real big hang up for me that it's not enjoyable at all.
Yeah,
but
I'm sorry, continue.
For a linear dungeon, I feel like you at least have options of where you can pull bigger and make up time and do stuff around people's cooldowns. And I've had a lot of fun in there depending on who's tanking.
Yeah, I think Skyreach is definitely painted a lot by the fact that my beta experience was entirely pugged. So sometimes pulls that can be fun are, in fact, CIA waterboarding torture. And sometimes the other way around, depending on the luck of the draw in beta LFG. I do agree with you that I think uptime is the biggest problem for the bird boss, and I think that the thing that is maybe the most frustrating about it is that because it isn't a pulsing AoE, it is incredibly disruptive to get a bird. So not only is it punishing in the sense that you now have to kill it, but while it is alive, every single person's game plan is disrupted in trying to make sure it gets where it needs to be. If you are the target of its fixate, make sure you are not standing in it, just chilling, taking infinite damage. So I would agree with you that that will likely be the problem. I do think, though, that you are absolutely right. The first boss feels great. I actually think the last boss feels pretty damn good as well. And the pulls that are there, I think Skyreach working for me is if it ends up sort of like Nexus-Point Xenas, where it ends up being fast, big pulls, aggressive, and like you said, doubling up on things that are manageable. I could see this ending up pretty good. My experience was overall negative, and I think that if the way it is tuned ends up pushing it towards smaller pulls, I could see it being kind of bad. So I'm gonna maybe say we split the middle here. I will stop fighting for an ass or D tier here. How do we think it compares to our Mists of Tirna Scythe and our Sanguine Depths?
For me, I still put it ahead of Sanguine Depths. But I know that you are very much wanting to not do that.
Well, I'll be convinced. I'm open to being convinced. Where would you say compares to Nexus-Point?
Definitely like Nexus-Point more than Skyreach.
Okay.
But not by a lot.
I could be convinced for B tier Skyreach. If you take the parts that I didn't like, which is one Colossus at a time, and if you're in a group that, if it's built to where a coordinated group can make even the slog parts of this dungeon feel fast-paced and fun, I would absolutely be open to a B tier Skyreach. So
I'm kind of thinking B tier.
All right, B tier Skyreach. Let's go, Warlords of Draenor. Skyreach going up there with our other Warlords of Draenor absolute gems, like the fucking train that I cannot believe we were forced to experience. That shit was definitely going low tier. If it were to pop up on the Wheel of Dungeons, which we will now spin once again. Hopefully we don't get something as similarly obscure as... No shit.
That was so close.
That was perfect. Okay, we're back in Warlords of Draenor with Iron Docks. And this dungeon appeared very briefly in Season 4 of Shadowlands, which was 2-3 months maybe at most. This was a very brief time that this was in meta. Do you have any thoughts on Iron Docks?
I'm gonna make one note here.
Okay, hit me with it.
This exact season of Shadowlands, I did not play DPS.
Okay.
Venthyr Havoc Demon Hunter was pretty much unplayable, and every other spec of Demon Hunter Covenant was unplayable because double legendaries were so bad. So I had to tank this as Vengeance in a BDK only season. And that dungeon did the most unbelievable amount of melee swing damage, and it was the most punishing thing I have probably ever played on my Vengeance Demon Hunter, including the last boss autoed me for 90% of my health.
That is...
So,
yeah.
I have a pretty negative look on this dungeon, especially a lot of the bugged interactions with it. We had stuff like Hunter's Pet being Eyes of the Beasted through the little maze section to pull the final mob and kill the RP. We had the second boss being pulled into a corner where none of the mechanics would go off anymore, and you just tank and spanked all 3 mobs. We had the third boss being pulled up onto the ship or outside of the map with a lock gateway, where he would also not do mechanics, or you would double him with the last boss because he was, again, bugged and would not do mechanics. So, in design and the bugs people abused, that dungeon was legitimately awful, though it did have some very fun large big pulls with a Blood Death Knight tanking it because they could not die and you had Desert Warlocks.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the thing is that this was the first time that they had considered making dungeons return, right? Because this was the first season where it wasn't just you do BFA for 2 years, Shadowlands for 2 years. Now we had Iron Docks and Grimrail Depot, both from Warlords of Draenor, and it became immediately apparent as well, in addition to all the shit that was completely broken, that visual clarity was not invented until like 2019 World of Warcraft. They just straight up ported Warlords of Draenor Iron Docks into the modern Mythic Plus. I remember I was quite squishy as a DPS player. Obviously you were too if the last boss was hitting you for 90% as a tank. But you would just die almost instantly from spells that were not visible yet. The fire arrows had like a 1.5 second delay before you could even see the spell. And so if
that
you
first
moving,
boss was awful.
Oh my
that first
God,
boss was terrible. And people started standing up on a railing because it wouldn't hit you.
Nobody even knew. Like, I remember most people not even knowing in most pug groups how the first boss even operated. I barely even remember it. I remember, you know, looking for your count because most of the animals after the second boss, I remember sucking to pull. So I remember you going into, like, weird back alleys of the docks to get all kinds of mobs. You were just pulling giant clumps together, AoEing them all down. You would die to who knows what. You're getting arrows shot at you from 19 different mobs. If you wear cloth, you could just die like that if you get double targeted. Yeah, this was brutal. And like you said, Death Knight season. If you didn't have a Death Knight to group these mobs, they were just coming at you from all angles. You had to be incredibly careful of where you stepped, because I remember that it was a very open concept dungeon. There were mobs on your left and right, and you only wanted to walk down this narrow straight to pull the ones in front of you. So, if you get crowd controlled in any way, if you get feared, you're probably walking into mobs. You're pulling more shit. Yeah. Not a great experience.
I just remember the trash being so rough. Like, so goddamn rough. And the thing that was interesting is, I want to say in that season, they were actually very good with the affix, the Nathrezim one, where they took all the pain points out of almost every single dungeon, and this one did not benefit from that in any way. So, especially like in that season, this was my least favorite dungeon. I think even less so than Grimrail Depot, which was very difficult to do, but
that's impressive.
They did it. This one, I think, is like bottom of D for me.
Yeah. Oh, man. And, too, I don't know if you remember, pulling as many mobs as possible into the 4 iron stars you could shoot.
Yes.
There's no good in this dungeon. Okay, challenge. Give me one good thing from Iron Docks.
Large pulls.
Okay, boom. Does that save it from ass tier?
I think so, but I didn't even get the DPS experience. I had a lot of fun doing big AoE as VDH, because that was one of the few things I could do.
Right. Plus, you had the Nathrezim. It was in a good season. I honestly think that Shadowlands Season 4, for all of its faults, that being the fact that we got, cramped into the 5-square-foot room with the turret boss in Grimrail Depot, where he would just randomly RNG one-shot you with his grenade. For all of the faults in that season, it was really fun, and I think you got access to your Dragonflight talents at one point, if not the start of the season. So, Iron Docks was maybe a good sandbox for you to play your class in and see what it feels like to hit 20 targets. But then you have to deal with the ramifications of pulling 20 mobs from 2014. So, D tier.
Yeah.
Alright. Good old Algeth'ar Academy. This was Dragonflight's S tier. I think this dungeon is pretty much the closest to like a HD remaster that we've ever seen, in the sense that the changes are very minimal. Probably more so than any reworked dungeon so far. Maybe the biggest differences that you'll notice in a day-to-day is the fact that the bosses encourage different strategies. To give them credit, it does seem as though they've removed Veximus's funky-ass overlap that you had to prepare for 3 minutes in advance, because he no longer gains energy. You now have a reason to not always just start with the fire on Croft, so you're going to be doing the bosses a little bit differently. And it does seem as though they've made a couple of the trash packs... To be clear, I think the trash before the last boss is, I would say, worse this time around. I do think that they made the experience of pulling to the last boss worse. But other than that, do you feel as though anything was significantly changed?
So, they did... I feel like, if I remember correctly, they actually took casts off the little Arcane Voidwalker guys. If you know the ones I'm talking about.
Yes,
they might have been called Arcane Manifestations. So there's less cast spam. But yeah, for the most part, it is relatively unchanged, other than a couple of mechanical changes for, like, Croth and Veximus. They did one thing on the last boss that I don't understand and I really dislike. I think they listed this as a bug fix, which is very concerning for their documentation. They fixed it so you drop puddles at 3 stacks again, when that was an intentional change to make it 4 stacks, so you'd play around the damage amp more, and it was a lot less of, like, this is a bad bullet hell. But what they did when they did that was, okay, instead of 3 stacks, you drop the puddles at 4, but the fight starts with 2 circles on the ground, so you're not doing nothing for the first minute. So now we have those puddles, and we drop at 3 stacks, and it is actually hell so fast on that boss now. So that is, like, one negative. The trash before that boss, though, as a melee player, I think is much better. Previously, what we did was we would play all the spinny guys on the stairs, and you would see access to them standing below them because they would bug out and they wouldn't hit you. But if you messed up, you'd instantly die. Now, it's not just a melee mechanic, and it's also range, so I'm sure Mr. Mage over here is not a big fan of the changes.
You got me. I have to do something on these mobs now.
Yeah. I do think it... The problem I had every time I ran this dungeon was every single tank line of sighted the mobs inside the tiny-ass room that you used to pull them into, not thinking the area denial. And then everything went to hell every single time. And if they just bought them in the open, it would have been fine. So I think that's going to be like a routing thing we see get changed. They also changed it later in the beta cycle, so instead of dropping 2 images that span, they only dropped 1. It just got a lot easier after that too, to be honest. But it's like the most tank and spank dungeon. You just get to do massive pulls. They don't really do much. There's a couple mechanics here and there. But the thing that'll like really kill you is you just pull too much and your tank's gonna flop, or too many dots go that your healer can't heal. So you're really only limited by what your group is comfortable with, not mechanic spam. And to me, it feels very fun. You'll get, some bonus stats for your class. A lot of people are gonna take haste and just feel better. But all in all, I think Algeth'ar to me is just like a hard S tier dungeon, even if that last little bit is worse for range players.
Yeah, I think I will come in and I will agree with you here. I think in terms of the bonus stats, quick little useless trivia here, but haste is usually the most valuable for pretty much everybody, even if your spec likes something else, with the sole reason of haste scales off of itself. So if you have any haste, 5% haste is usually more valuable than other stats. Anyway, I'm gonna shut up. That's just nerd shit. I do.
Hold on, I gotta out-math you here.
Okay.
I have to destroy your math with facts and logic.
Big dog me here.
You're gonna get big dogged right now. So, while that's true and haste scales itself, there is something that isn't considered very often, and that is 1% haste is worth the least amount of stats. 1% haste takes less stats to get than 1% critter mastery, very slightly this expansion. Same with 1% verse. So for a lot of classes, at least in the past, it was the case that, verse is like 15% worse than haste for me. But you actually get comparatively 20% more stats, in quotes, per stat rating. So, verse was actually better for a lot of people, but they just went with their best stat, even though mathematically it was wrong. That's a lot more different now, because they've increased the scaling of classes in so many different ways, and holy crap, do a lot of people just love Critical Strike. But I just wanted to throw that out there.
I think it's good that you did, because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to steal your useless information. It's not useless, to be clear, but I'm going to steal that, and now this will be my go-to tip, and I will not give you credit for it. I'm just going to say it like I came up with it myself. Realistically, somebody told me this 3 years ago. I don't even remember who, probably, and I'm passing it off as my own. I'm going to do the same thing with what you said. But
perfect.
In terms of your documentation comment for the last boss, so in wanting to play off of the damage amp, one thing that I think was quite funny about the last boss of Algeth'ar Academy the first time around is that the boss has a mechanic that, to my knowledge, throughout the entirety of Dragonflight was not really tracked by boss mods, where she would just randomly give one person a stack. And that contributed to probably more of the deaths on this boss than anything else. I do think that that is maybe one of the only really odd parts of the bosses that it seems as though they may have kept. But most of the weird shit that the bosses do, like the Veximus overlap, has been removed. Froth, sadly, does still interrupt casting, which is a fucking pain in the ass. But yeah, other than that, I'm kind of with you. Most of this dungeon is pretty much either the same, slightly better, or slightly worse. This is really the least touched up rework that I've ever seen, at least that I can think of. So, do we think that it can keep its legacy as an S tier dungeon?
I do. It's fun. It's just a fun dungeon.
I think I'm with you. I can't imagine a world where my go-to example of a really fun pull is not the first pull of Algeth'ar Academy. Even my minor frustrations, like the fact that I have to turn my brain on for the last quarter of the dungeon don't really outpace the fact that that is like what I imagine it's like to take heroin, but for DPS players. So, Algeth'ar Academy will stay S tier. Where are we thinking? Above or below Maisara Caverns? I'd say probably above.
I think it's above.
Put it above. I would agree.
There was also one other thing that was changed in this dungeon that we didn't bring up.
Okay, hit me with it.
The added, what are they called? The graveyard points are a big plus on this dungeon. The fact you actually spawn at Croft and Veximus after you kill them, and my pugs will not get confused running back and pull more mobs and die a second time, is a big positive to me.
Yep, Waystones as a whole have been a huge W in just about every context since their addition to the game. For years, it felt like that was like pulling teeth to try to get Blizzard to not give a 45-second run back to any dungeon. So it's good to see that they are kind of just doing it without thinking and putting it everywhere you'd want it. But we now go from S tier, our beloved Algeth'ar Academy, to Magister's Terrace. I will say, immediately, this dungeon, within 3 seconds, pissed me off. Because this dungeon has the Tazavesh Streets opener, where you walk in, there is 5 mobs and then a brick wall that does not open until you kill those 5 mobs. So, you are faced with the terrible question that you hate to ask yourself. Do I bloodlust 5 mobs, or do I hold it? In Tazavesh, the answer is easy, because when you kill the 5 mobs, you have 40 on the other side of the room. But in Magister's Terrace, the 12 mobs in the next room have 0 health, and it feels terrible. That's where I'm at. Okay, you want to take us through your thoughts on Magister's Terrace beyond the first pull?
So I don't actually remember the timer in this dungeon, because that can be a timer question for how many lusts you're trying to hit. But you're definitely right. It doesn't make sense to cool down the first pack, which you're going to press cooldowns, or you're wrong. Yeah. And then lust the next pack, and then if they die, you now have Bloodlust to walk through the RP at the same level, but you feel a little faster. And
real quick, the RP feels invisible. I have no doubt you can glide over 100% of it. I can blink over most of it, and I think most classes, if you jump down right once you walk in the room, there is almost never a scenario where you can't just walk straight through. And you'll probably want to do that anyways, because you're going to grab all the little books and hopefully pull them into the Pyromancer.
So, the one thing with that is, I've always skipped over it. Then I found out recently, there's actually a little book that someone in your group can pick up, and everyone gets a 5% haste buff. So I've started doing that. And no one in my groups have ever picked that up before, so that was interesting to me to find out. But, yeah, that RP is just a really weird one. It's simple enough. It's kind of whatever. I don't, hate it. It doesn't add or really do much, but it's kind of whatever. I definitely agree with you that the first pull is awkward. You can't do anything or add anything to it. You're just fighting 5 mobs. Side note, it used to be a single mob. That was horrible. I'm glad they added 4 guys to that room. It used to just be the Sentinel.
Yeah, thankfully I did not experience that, or I would have been writing some very nasty things in the Mythic Plus beta discussion forum. But, yeah, that's a good dodge there. I'm not important, and I don't know if you met the qualifications to be one of Blizzard's beautiful alpha invitees. I did not. I'm a no one. But
I was.
You were? Okay. Well, I'm getting big dog today. So, yeah, I think after the RP, you've obviously got one Pyromancer just standing there. Obviously, you pull the books in. Ideally, you're going to pull the books in unless your healer fucking sucks. But I feel like that's a recurring theme, at least until the dungeon goes voidy. At least for all of this dungeon before you kill the first boss and the initial area after it, a big theme is you will have 1 real mob and 3 or 4 really shit mobs. You'll have 1 Pyromancer and 5 to 8 books in the library. Maybe you'll pull a construct in the next courtyard and some mobs on it, depending on how we end up with routing. In the next room, you've got Pyromancers and Mana Worms. This is a dungeon where you really want to be a funnel class. Playing something that ramps is gonna fucking suck, usually. I mean, unless you're like an arcane mage where you are a prio monster, but if you are a pad spec that ramps, you're gonna have a pretty bad time here, I think.
You just made me realize that I have to play Eldrachi Reaver in this dungeon for the rest of the season, and I'm a little upset about that. Just want you to know that.
See, I'm a terrible Shadarek fan because I don't even know if that's the Throw Glaive one or the other one. I never know. But,
that's the Throwglaive funnel one that they just giga buffed.
Oh yeah, well, okay, well then you'll be having a good time in Magister's Terrace, assuming the next half of it is okay.
I think I'll be giving my group a good time in there too, because I have a feeling I'm going to be killing the Prio mob before the little ones now.
Okay,
but
I mean, that's going to be kind of crazy, because some of these are, like, extreme. Like, we all know that there's, like, Prio mobs where you've got, like, the Shards of Halkias that are, like, double everything else. But this is sometimes as extreme as, like, you know, a Pyromancer, a couple guys that about half a Pyromancer, and then, like, half the pull is fucking mana worms that die in 3 globals anyway.
Yeah, those do have no health.
Yeah, I will say the highlight of this dungeon for me is the bosses. I do have to hold this to Blizzard, though. They really jump scared me with this first boss, because the first boss of Magister's Terrace is just the third boss of Spires of Ascension, and I was not ready to relive that shitty dungeon. So, maybe put a bit of a warning there next time, but other than that, I think the first boss is still pretty solid. I think the second boss is interesting enough. I honestly am surprised they went down to 2 debuffs on the second boss, down from 3, because it does make it a little less interesting, but it does make it a lot more hug accessible. The third boss...
Yeah, it's a lot easier.
Yes, way easier. Third boss, banger. I think the third boss plays quite well. It's very fun to be a spec that can shine if you're a multi-daughter, a cleaver, whatever you are, you feel good on the third boss. Digentrius. How are you feeling on Digentrius? I think it gets a little...
So they did change him. And I'm a little confused because I thought they were changing the debuffs that went out that shot out of you in every direction.
Right.
But it seems they also removed one of the void lines, so now it's split into 2 instead of 4. Did you experience that as well in M0?
I did not see that in M0. I actually have some VODs. Oh my god, yeah, it's 2 zones.
Yeah, so they changed that randomly, this reset. I'm just, like, kind of confused, because it just makes it, I guess, again, a lot more pug accessible. I can do half the room now myself.
Yeah, it doesn't even... That kind of, I think, maybe takes a lot of what I do think was special about this boss and kind of gets rid of it, honestly. Because...
Yeah.
The main quirk here that's been kind of fun is joking about this being like a volleyball boss, where you pass it back to the other side.
But now it's a balloon that you're keeping up in the air yourself.
Right. It's not quite as exciting. I understand the removal of a debuff on the second boss, because that is a mechanic that is actually kind of crazy, but Digentrius feels maybe a little too bicycle training wheels with only 2 zones, because really, the biggest expectation of Digentrius before the change, I assume, would be a DPS managing each corner, and one person, maybe the healer, works with your tank. And I have to imagine that the main thing that they made this change for is to make it easier for the healer. Personally, I'm of the opinion that healer players should just fucking deal with it and soak the ball. But I'm also an elitist asshole. So...
I will say, as a melee player, it's a little unfortunate that you had to commit to just going out of melee every time the ball was coming. And it could be nice with proper group coordination that it turns into a ranged mechanic, but yeah, it just feels like a weird change. I almost wonder if this was something they did in the vein of like, oh, someone DCs or someone dies and you just have to wipe on the boss, because there's not really a feasible way to do 2 sections as one person.
Yeah.
Although honestly, it's still kind of pretty doable. But now it's like, I just imagine I could watch a mage player do all 4 sections on their own, and they just need to shimmer over the line.
Yeah, I definitely think that, here's the thing. this could, if I'm correct, and this was a healer-oriented change, there is a situation that's very lovely for you and I, but very nightmare realm for healers, which is where we just say, go for a run. Make your healer get every single one. Like you said, it'll probably end up being a mage responsibility, but if I can, I'm gonna make them do it. So that's gonna depend on how hard it ends up being to heal.
And, like, I guess at the end of the day, that's the thing. You can, as a group, decide that one person is the mechanic bitch. And, you know, sometimes we just make the boomkin do it because we don't like them. Sometimes the healer does it because healers aren't people. And sometimes the mage is told they have to do it because healers also aren't people.
Amen, yes. Well, assuming that my healer doesn't have their own drool stuck under their WASD key, then I suppose I will be willing to step up to the plate. Aside from the bosses, I am overall pretty negative on this dungeon. My highlight pulls would be, with some good groups on the beta, we were able to bloodlust the hallway leading up to the second boss for the first time, and pull pretty much the entire room. I did think that was a good moment from this dungeon, but other than that, I don't even really know. I don't even know if the mobs at the very end before the last boss, I don't even know if they're pullable, because I don't think I've done a single Magister's Terrace where people haven't just had a warlock and opted to gateway skip at the end. There's really nothing very enjoyable or special about 2/3 of the mobs in the dungeon. How are you feeling?
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I do think once it goes Void section, there's really just like the Void Hordes that need to be kicked very high prio, and you can kind of line everything in and then AoE stop on bolts, and you could probably do some pretty big pulls, but when I was doing this dungeon on beta, it felt like it hadn't really been figured out, and doing it M0s, I can tell you nobody has lining anything figured out.
Oh, hell
Every
no.
time a tank goes to do it, your healer is standing in the doorway getting bolted by 8 mobs and then complaining about the tank. So I think this will be maybe better than we think it is right now, but as of right now, it's definitely one of my least favorite dungeons.
Yeah.
I don't know if I dislike it as much as Seat, though. That's where I'm struggling.
Yeah. I think... I guess I'll have to see where Degentrius lands up, but for me, I could even see it going above Mists of Tirna Scythe and going, like, front of C tier. Because for most of my experience on the beta... Sorry, I don't know how to put this back down here. Yeah,
he's just ass tier now. Wow.
Okay, he's not ass tier. Most of my experience, I've kind of just seen this as, like, sort of mid, neither too offensive or too exciting. Maybe a little more things that I dislike in terms of total minutes spent in the dungeon. But I could definitely see an argument for either. And I wanna back you up there, because realistically, every single dungeon on this list is going to be so different in 3 months compared to how it is today. I mean, I guess the meta for most players right now is go through a Mythic 0 and either vote kick someone as the scapegoat halfway through, or get vote kicked, and then both of those people go make a complaint post about each other on the WoW subreddit. I don't think that's going to be the meta in a couple months. So, I'd say my upper bound is, if you were convinced this was good, I would go bottom of B.
I think upper C is about right.
Yeah, I could be also convinced that Seed is maybe better sometimes. And just for the sake of completeness, are we better than Sanguine Deaths?
I think yes.
Okay. Do we clear Mists of Tirna Scythe?
I think also yes.
All right.
Which is interesting now that I'm looking at this. We're officially at the point where 7 out of 8 dungeons in this tier are placed ahead of Mists of Tirna Scythe, Sanguine Depths, Rise from Dragonflight, and what do we put in D tier again?
Fuck. Iron Docks.
Iron Dock. And it's like, we rolled some of the worst dungeons I can think of on that wheel, to the point that I almost want you to slam a 5th one, to see if we can get something that could go somewhere else.
I'm down to keep going. Alright. We'll fix the tier list in editing, but if you're comfortable with a wheel spin or two, I'll keep going.
let's do another spin, because those were some horrible bonus dungeons.
I'm calling this now. We are about to get something awful. This is going to be terrible. Alright. Wheel, don't let us down. Alright, we got something playable. Kazavesh Gambit.
This is good, because we just had this recently, too.
We did.
So, I think I'm going to let you start with this one, because I've been a certified Gambit hater. Not entirely, but I have some qualms with some Murlocs.
Okay, that's fair. So, Gambit, I think, follows the trend of a dungeon that gets... Okay, here's my opinion. I think that when Blizzard looks at a season, and when they decide, you know, we're going to bring back 4 dungeons, I'm of the opinion that they always try to pick a really good staple dungeon that's like maybe an A tier or S tier on like the all dungeons tier list. And I think that they do that because one of their other goals in each season is to make a F tier dungeon better. You know, we saw that this expansion with Season 2, which was our return to Mythic Plus being enjoyable, had Theater of Pain in it, which was historically like one of the fucking worst dungeons of all time. So I think that every single rework that they do, whenever they bring back a dungeon, it moves closer to the median. I think the best dungeons tend to get worse, and the worst dungeons tend to become bearable, usually. So for Gambit, I think that that kind of follows, in the sense that, what are the best parts of Gambit? Well, the best parts of Gambit are big fucking Murloc pulls. For the most part, they kept that. They are still kind of fucking annoying in some ways. Running away is fucking annoying. I guess, I don't... Were there more bolters or less? I guess I can't remember. Go ahead.
So, the thing I want to actually note on that is, I'm of the impression that they made Gambit better, not worse.
Okay.
And I think it's hard to dispute that, because those fish sticks used to be totems. You could only hit them with pure single target, and most specs in the game, really, especially in the current day and age, can't actually deal with totems. So those used to be way more difficult to deal with, and then you had the running mobs that were also healing, because you couldn't actually kill the fish sticks, and there was no real good answers.
Well,
so you wanted
if I'm wrong, real quick, but it's my memory that in the initial iteration of Gambit, you would never see a fish stick, because it would not recast when stunned. So unless somebody fucked up pretty massively, there was no healing. I could be misremembering.
I think in Shadowlands that wasn't the case, and then when it came back, originally that was going to be the case, and they just changed it. They said this isn't going to be a cast anymore, but they're not totems. So that's where it's like, because I know we had to deal with them in Shadowlands a lot. Maybe it was, you know, we had a lot less CC back then.
Yes,
that was before talent tree reworks and stuff. So maybe that was what it was. But I do think that area got a little bit better, if anything. And I remember you really wanted to skip what you could in the Murloc area just to not deal with those mobs at times. So that's where I'm a little torn, because that area seems like something that should be fun, but then a lot of the Murlocs die very fast, and you're left over with like 4 of them, and you're dealing with the fish sticks, and it's if they run into another pack, so you don't have something that can deal with that, oh my god, that area could be frustrating.
Quite frankly, I think any situation where a pull, like if you say the total time to a pull is from when every mob you gather is all dead. If you're spending 20 seconds of a 45-second pull chasing down the last 3 Murlocs that fucked off in 19 different directions, that is a huge fail. And I think that probably would have been way more noticeable too if Hunter wasn't meta for this season that it returned, because obviously Binding Shot is basically the fucking direct answer to mobs running away. But
I didn't get to play with that.
Yes, you unfortunately have a Ret Paladin. Who we love, by the way, to be clear. Who we love. I just have to make fun of all Ret Paladins. It's nothing personal. Real quick, though, I will say the reason I think that this maybe got worse is because the actual second area with the Dragon Boss became a lot more stressful and still quite unclear. You are taking a lot of kind of invisible damage in the pirate area from, I don't actually remember what the damage sources are called, but I remember that in Shadowlands, it was very, very common to your tank would sprint ahead. This did stay, where they would pull the back pack into the front left pack. And if you were feeling it, you could even pull the right pack in with this, or at least very quickly chain it once casters were under control. That doesn't feel very manageable in this recent iteration, just because of how much passive damage all those mobs are doing. But I will also say, I bowed out of Season 3 faster than pretty much any Mythic Plus season. So it's very possible that come Turbo Boost, come a lot of more later season developments, you would maybe have had a very different experience there.
I think that may actually be a misunderstanding of how that area did work. Because the damage that was coming out, the surprise damage, was sword toss, which the Corsairs threw the sword, it did a little AoE, and they didn't have a cast time. They had a set, they'd cast 8 seconds into the pull, then every 15 or so. There was actually groups that did that on a 23, all the previous pack and the 4 packs there all together.
Yeah.
But you needed an all-range comp with people spread, and you had specific CCs assigned on the Corsairs so that the sword tosses would be desynced for the rest of the pull after those first stops. So that was what was done on a higher key level, was you just made sure no matter how many Corsairs you had to desync them with single target CC. And that made it very manageable. We typically would do that with 2 casters, and as soon as I would kill one off as an Eldrachi Havoc doing all the funnel, we'd just bring another caster in, that caster dies, we pull in another pack, and we just chain it. But as long as you stunned a sword toss, and you had those sectioned out, it was actually very free, because that was the only group damage that went out other than kicks, and the only thing that would kill you then is a kick going off with a sword toss or 2 kicks on one person.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. I mean, hey, if you need a single target stun, I can't think of one better than Hammer of Justice, okay?
Yes, that was the one we used.
Ret Paladin Rising, okay. Beyond that, the last section of this area, I didn't think was really better or worse. I guess the biggest change is the fact that the stop changes from the War Within now made it so you were so unbelievably reliant on being able to kick the rifts. I mean, obviously you can delay them because you have a lot of stuns, but maybe it seemed like you were more prone to a fuck-up happening in the last area than you were in Shadowlands. But I don't really think that... Go ahead.
I was going to say, there's actually another reason for that, because those mobs chain cast bolts as well as having the Rift. So the Rift is an instant group wipe. The bolts are too dangerous to have at the same time as a Pulsar. But what they changed between Shadowlands and going forward was at some point they massively nerfed the lockout on kicks, which we've gotten back now, but that was part of why that felt so awful. A melee interrupted for 3 seconds. So no matter what, to stop them from bolting at all times, you had to have kicks assigned and weave CCs, otherwise people were going to die anyway. And I think that just felt awful to play.
Yeah, I think I'm with you that I think really a lot of the frustrations that have been alleviated in the Midnight Dungeons are almost entirely down to the removal of the expectations of crowd control chains. I think that when we look at the dungeons that maybe were least enjoyable in the War Within, that is usually one of the biggest features, is letting the mobs be existing unstunned for more than 3 seconds is catastrophic, like we saw in Priory, where basically any pack would kill you in half a second if you gave them the chance.
Yeah.
So I would say Gambit is still a high tier, for sure. I have to edit this in because I'm a dumbass with a very low production value, but I would probably go top of A, maybe, for Gambit.
For me, I think I would prefer doing Pit of Saron over Gambit.
Okay.
I think I would put it between Pit of Saron and Windrunner, somewhere up in the middle of A. For editing purposes, that isn't really going to work for you, but anywhere in A, I'm definitely comfortable with. And I think
with you mentioning it, though, I'm with you there. I think Pit of Saron, with a group that knows the route, you know what you're going to be doing, the pulls are grouped reasonably, I would definitely say that has been a more enjoyable experience than most of my Gambit experiences. So I am with you.
Yeah.
We'll just
Yeah,
weave
so
it
that's
right in there.
about where I'd put it.
Okay.
And I still think this is a good thing, like, to really mention is a lot of people like Gambit, and the fact that I'm comfortable putting 3 dungeons ahead of that makes me have a pretty good outlook on this next season.
I am 100% with you. I think that despite the fact that, okay, my class in the early iterations of the beta was aborted. My, UI completely gone. It decimated. I spent 90% of the beta playing this game basically on a UI made of sticks and leaves. And yet, my beta experience was overwhelmingly positive. So I'm with you. I think that this is actually going to be a great season. And I know we've been yapping for quite a bit, so I can let you go, but I do have to ask you this quick, and you can answer this as fast as you'd like. But Ego Dome Aldani was the last dungeon added to the game, and presumably was added using the game design logic from Midnight. I personally am of the opinion that while Ego Dome Aldani was a pretty solid dungeon in the War Within, it does not rank as highly when you put it up against other Midnight-style dungeons. If you could, with no input from Aaron whatsoever, throw Ego Dome Aldani on this list, where are you putting it?
So, one thing that's going to taint Eco Dome for me is the amount of casts in the second and third area and the amount of damage Farstalker Leaps did with 0 way to deal with them. With that, I think I would put it in the middle of B between Nexus-Point and Skyreach, somewhere around there. The boss design, I think, was pretty good. It was very simple, in the same way that a lot of the Midnight dungeons simply are.
Yeah.
But I do think it was good, and it was like very intuitive for what you were supposed to do. But that didn't mean it wasn't punishing or just simply easy. It was just like designed at an easier level with mechanics that would punish you really hard if you mess them up. But you really need to mess up and not understand what's going on for that to happen. So I thought it was a pretty good dungeon. I would throw it middle of B.
Okay, perfect. Sweet. Alright, now, in my usual fashion, I have yapped far too long. So, I'm going to say, thank you for making a guest appearance on my shitty YouTube channel. Shadarek is fucking awesome. He is definitely one of the he is by far the smartest Demon Hunter player that I know. So, thank you so much. Make sure you check out everything that he has ever done. Watch every single one. Comment on every single video that you love him. And all that other shit. Is there anything that you would like to throw in for yourself before we get the fuck out of here?
No, I don't think so. This was a pretty fun experience. It was good.
Okay, hell yeah. I'm glad that my shitty video could accommodate a good experience. Anyway, I'm Aaron, and thank you so much for your time. We're gonna shut up now. Peace. Man, I am so fucking awkward.